At dinner, my son mocked me. I gave him an envelope, his termination. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I built Meridian Solutions in a basement, not metaphorically, not as some inspirational business story simplification, literally in a basement, the damp, concrete-floored space beneath a dry cleaner's shop on 4th Street, where the ceiling pipes dripped rust-colored water, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects. It was 1998. I was 34 years old, recently divorced, with a 7-year-old son and $8,000 in savings that was supposed to last us 6 months. My ex-husband had taken the house, the car, and whatever dignity I'd had left after discovering he'd been sleeping with his paralegal for 2 years. What he didn't take was my business plan. I'd been working in logistics consulting for 8 years, watching companies hemorrhage money on inefficient supply chains, while consultants like me offered Band-Aid solutions that justified our fees, but rarely fixed the underlying problems. I knew I could do better. I knew I could build systems that actually worked, that saved clients real money, that transformed operations instead of just documenting their failures. So I rented that basement for $400 a month, bought a used desk and a computer, and started cold calling every manufacturing company within a 100-mile radius. The first year, I made $23,000, barely enough to cover rent and food. I worked 16-hour days while my son, David, stayed with my mother. On weekends, he would sit in that basement with me, coloring while I typed proposals, building towers out of paper clips while I worked spreadsheets. "Mama, when will we have a real office?" he asked once, looking around at the water-stained walls. "Soon, baby, when Mama's company grows big enough." "How big?" "So big we'll have windows, and a coffee machine that doesn't smell like dirty socks." He laughed. He had my laugh then open, trusting, full of light. By year 3, we had windows. A small office on the 2nd floor of a better building. 2 employees. Revenue that let me breathe without constant panic. David was 10, and I could finally afford to pay my mother for babysitting, could buy him new school clothes instead of thrift store finds. By year 5, we had an entire floor, 12 employees, contracts with major clients, media recognition as a woman-owned business to watch. I was profiled in the business journal, photographed in the office I'd built, asked about work-life balance and breaking glass ceilings. I never mentioned the basement, or the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd make next month's payroll, or the Thanksgivings where David and I ate takeout Chinese because I was too exhausted to cook and too broke to take us anywhere nice. By year 10, Meridian Solutions was a multi-million-dollar operation. We had offices in 3 cities, 57 employees, blue-chip clients who paid premium fees because our solutions actually worked. And David was 17, getting ready to graduate high school, talking about college, about his future. "What do you want to study?" I asked him one night over dinner, a real dinner in the house I'd bought, at a table that wasn't secondhand. "Business, I think. Like you?" My heart swelled. "You want to work in consulting?" "Maybe, or maybe I'll do something else. But I want to understand how companies work, how to build something that matters." "You will, baby. You'll build something amazing." I meant it. Looking at him, this young man with my eyes and his father's dimpled chin, this person I'd raised while building an empire, I felt something close to completion. Everything I'd sacrificed, every impossible choice, every sleepless night, it was all worth it because I'd given him possibilities I'd never had. When David got into State University with a partial scholarship, I paid the rest without hesitation. When he called from campus, excited about a business strategy course or a professor who'd praised his presentation. I listened with pride so fierce it physically hurt. When he graduated with honors and asked if there was a place for him at Meridian, I didn't even pretend to think about it. "Of course," I said. "I built this company for you." I see now that was my first mistake. Not hiring him, bringing family into business is always complicated, but it can work, but telling him I built it for him. Because I didn't. I built it for me, for survival, for proving I could exist without my ex-husband's approval, for making something that mattered. But David heard, "This is yours." This was always yours. And over the next 7 years, he started acting like it. His first day at Meridian, I gave him a security badge with his name embossed on it. I remember how he held it, running his thumb over the letters. David Morrison, Junior Analyst. "Welcome to the company," I said, formal, because we were in the office, because the other employees were watching. "Thanks, Mom," he corrected himself. "I mean, thank you, Ms. Morrison. Margaret is fine, or boss, if you prefer." I smiled to show I was joking. He smiled back. That open, trusting smile, my smile. I put him in logistics analysis, the same department where I'd started him my career. Not favoritism, he had the skills, the education, the aptitude. But also, yes, favoritism. Of course it was favoritism. He was my son. But I didn't hand him anything he didn't earn. Every promotion, every raise, every increased responsibility came after he'd proven himself. I was harder on him than on anyone else, actually. Questioned his analyses more thoroughly, sent back his reports with detailed feedback, made him redo presentations until they were perfect. "You're being too tough on him," my COO, Patricia, told me once. "He's good, better than good. You can ease up." "I'm preparing him," I said. "One day he might run this company. He needs to be ready." "Does he know that's your plan?" "Not officially, but he must suspect." "And if he's not interested? If he wants to do something else?" I hadn't considered that possibility. Why would I? This was Meridian. This was everything. By year 3 at the company, David was a senior analyst. By year 5, a project manager. By year 7, director of operations, overseeing a team of 15. He was 32, I was 59, and I was starting to think about succession planning. Not retirement. God, not retirement. I loved this company too much to leave it. But transitioning some responsibilities. Grooming David for the CEO role I'd held for 25 years. The board supported it. Patricia was less enthusiastic. "He's capable," she said carefully. "But Margaret, have you noticed how he talks about the business? About your decisions?" "What do you mean?" "He's dismissive. Last week you suggested we stick with our current software platform, and he actually rolled his eyes. Said something about old-school thinking. He's young. Young people think everything from 5 years ago is ancient." "It's more than that. He's building a following among the younger staff, positioning himself as the new generation in opposition to your outdated methods." "That's just ambition. I was ambitious too." "Were you disrespectful?" I didn't answer, because the truth was complicated. I hadn't been disrespectful to my bosses, because I'd left and started my own company. But if I'd stayed? If I'd been positioning myself to take over? Would I have been patient and deferential? Maybe not. "He's finding his voice," I said finally. "That's good. A leader needs conviction." Patricia looked at me with something like pity. "Just watch him, Margaret. That's all I'm saying." I should have listened. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. The way David would override my decisions in meetings, then apologize privately, but never publicly. The way he'd schedule important client calls without informing me, then explain he didn't want to bother me with details. The way younger employees started coming to him instead of me with questions, with ideas, with concerns. The way he'd introduce himself at conferences. David Morrison, Director of Operations at Meridian. My mother founded it, but I'm handling the day-to-day now. Not, we're handling it together. Not, she's still very involved. I was being erased from my own company. Gently, gradually, so smoothly I almost didn't notice, until the comments started. Maybe it's time to consider new perspectives. The market has changed since you started this company. I'm not sure that approach works anymore in today's environment. Each one was delivered with a smile, with respect, with the veneer of constructive feedback. But underneath was a message. You're outdated. You're obsolete. You're in the way. I told myself I was being sensitive, that he was just confident, not disrespectful, that I should be proud he had strong opinions. But late at night, alone in my house, the same house I'd bought with my first real profit, the house where I'd raised him, I felt something cold settling in my chest. My son was pushing me out. The dinner was David's idea. "Let's do something nice," he said. "Celebrate the company's anniversary. Invite the senior team, some key clients. Make it a real event." "At the office?" "No, somewhere nice. My place. Laura and I can host." Laura was his wife of 3 years. Polite, beautiful, and utterly uninterested in me. "That's generous, but—" "Mom, let me do this. Let me show appreciation for everything you've built. Please." How could I refuse? It sounded thoughtful, loving even. I should have known better. The dinner was on a Saturday evening in October. David and Laura's house was one of those modern constructions, all glass and steel and open floor plans, the kind of place that appeared in architecture magazines. Nothing like the modest ranch where I'd raised him. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the navy suit I wore to board meetings. Professional, appropriate, safe. Patricia was already there, nursing a glass of wine and looking uncomfortable. "Margaret, you look lovely." "Thank you. How many are we expecting?" "About 20, I think. Senior team, a few board members, some clients." My stomach tightened. This wasn't an intimate dinner. This was a performance. The other guests arrived in clusters. James from finance, Michelle from marketing, our 3 biggest clients, 2 board members. Everyone important, everyone who mattered to the company's future. David played host beautifully. Charming, attentive, making sure everyone had drinks, introducing people who hadn't met. Laura floated through in a silk dress that probably cost more than my first month's basement rent, offering canapés and smiling. I stood near the window, watching my son work the room, and felt oddly distant, like I was watching a stranger. "He's good at this," Patricia said quietly beside me. "Yes." "Margaret, be careful tonight." "What do you mean?" "I don't know. I just have a feeling." Dinner was served at a long table that could have come from a catalog. White linens, crystal glasses, candles in silver holders. I was seated at the center, David at the head, the guest of honor and the host. The meal was catered, professional. I barely tasted it. I was too aware of the dynamic in the room, the way people deferred to David, the way conversations oriented around him. Even when someone asked me a question about the company's early days, David would interrupt with an anecdote, redirecting attention back to himself. "Those were different times," he'd say. "Different challenges. Today's market requires different thinking." After the main course, David stood up with his wine glass. The table quieted. "I want to propose a toast," he began, "to the woman who started Meridian Solutions 27 years ago, my mother." Everyone raised their glasses. I tried to smile. When she started the company, she had nothing but determination and a vision. She built something remarkable from that basement office. He paused for the knowing chuckles, and grew it into what we are today. He was saying the right words, but his tone was wrong. There was something condescending in it, something that made me sound like a historical figure rather than the current CEO. "But times change," he continued. "Markets evolve. What worked in 1998 doesn't necessarily work now. The logistics industry is more complex, more technology-driven, more global. It requires new thinking, new strategies, new leadership." The room had gone very quiet. I felt Patricia tense beside me. "Mom has done an incredible job, but let's be honest. He smiled. And it was his father's smile, sharp and cruel. She's from a different era. She still prints out emails. She doesn't understand blockchain or AI integration or half the tools we need to stay competitive. Someone laughed nervously. David's smile widened. Maybe it's time for her to enjoy retirement. Play golf, take up gardening, whatever people her age do. Another pause. Before she accidentally runs the company into the ground, trying to apply 1990s solutions to 2020's problems. The silence was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel every eye on me, could sense the collective holding of breath. David raised his glass higher. So here's to my mother. Thank you for building something worth taking over. He drank. A few people joined him, awkwardly, uncertainly. Most just stared at their plates. I sat very still, feeling something crystallize inside me. Not pain would come later. This was clarity, pure, cold, absolute clarity. My son had just publicly humiliated me. In front of my team, my board, my clients. He'd reduced my life's work to an obsolete artifact. He'd dismissed me as incompetent. He'd announced his intention to take my company. And he'd done it with a smile, as if it were a joke. As if I should laugh along. I reached into my purse. My hand was steady. 27 years of board meetings and difficult negotiations had taught me how to control my body, even when my emotions were in free fall. I pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored, business-sized, my name embossed in the corner. I'd prepared it yesterday, after Patricia's warning, after I'd finally admitted to myself what was happening. I placed it on the table in front of David. You're right, I said. My voice was calm, clear, carrying easily in the silence. It is time to pass things on, but not to you. David looked at the envelope, then at me. His smile faltered. What? Open it. He picked it up slowly, aware that everyone was watching. He slid out the single sheet of paper inside. I watched his face as he read it, watched confusion become shock, become something like fear. What is this? His voice was too loud, too sharp. Your termination notice, effective immediately. You're fired, David. Someone gasped. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. Patricia was staring at me with wide eyes. David's face had gone red. You can't do this. I can. As CEO and majority shareholder, I have full authority to make personnel decisions. You've been terminated for insubordination, for undermining company leadership, and for creating a hostile work environment. This is insane! He threw the paper on the table. Over a joke? A toast? You're firing me over a toast? I'm firing you for systematically trying to push me out of my own company. The toast was just the final straw, or maybe the final piece of evidence. I've worked here for 7 years. And I've worked here for 27. I built this company with my hands and my mind and my blood. You've spent 7 years trying to convince people you built it. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Everyone was frozen, watching this unfold like a theater performance. You wanted new leadership? I said. Fine. I'm bringing in someone new. Patricia will be taking over your role as Director of Operations, effective Monday. She's earned it. Patricia made a small sound of surprise. As for you, I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and built a company for. You have until Monday to clear out your office. Security will escort you if necessary. Mom? His voice cracked. You can't be serious. I'm your son. Which makes this harder, not easier. You thought being my son gave you the right to disrespect me? You thought family meant I'd tolerate being pushed aside. You were wrong. I didn't mean it was just a joke. No, it wasn't. And we both know it. I picked up my purse. Thank you for dinner, Laura. I'm sorry we won't be seeing more of each other. I walked to the door. Behind me, the silence was breaking into whispers, shocked murmurs. I didn't look back. Patricia caught up with me in the driveway. Margaret, wait. I stopped, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache. Are you okay? She asked. No, but I will be. Did you mean it? About me? Every word. You've earned that position 10 times over. Should have given it to you years ago instead of... I couldn't finish the sentence. I'm so sorry. About David. About how he... Don't, please. I can't talk about it yet. She nodded. Drive safe. I'll see you Monday. See you Monday. I drove home in a daze. The streets were quiet, the night dark. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, unable to make myself go inside. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Please, can we talk? I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I deleted it without responding. Another text. Mom, please, don't do this. I need this job. Delete. You're destroying my career over nothing, over a stupid joke. Delete. Fine. Be that way. I'll fight this. I'll talk to the board. They'll side with me. I typed a response. The board meets Monday. I've already sent them documentation of every instance of your insubordination over the past year. Patricia helped me compile it. You're done. I hit send and turned off my phone. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. I turned on one lamp in the living room and sat on the couch, still in my coat. On the wall across from me was a photograph from David's college graduation. Him in his cap and gown, me beside him, both of us beaming. He had his arm around my shoulders. I was looking at him with such pride, such love, such hope for his future. I'd given him everything, not just opportunities, I'd given plenty of those, but also my time, my energy, my unconditional support. I'd worked myself to exhaustion to build something he could inherit. And he'd thanked me by trying to take it before I was ready to give it. No, not even trying. Actually doing it. Slowly, methodically, he'd been erasing me from Meridian for years. Tonight was just the public announcement of what had already been happening in private. I thought about that young man with the open, trusting smile. The boy who'd sat in a basement office building paperclip towers. The son who'd asked when we'd have windows. When had he changed? Or had he always been this person, and I'd been too blinded by love to see it? My phone buzzed again. I turned it back on without thinking. Not David this time. Patricia. Board emergency meeting tomorrow morning. David called them. They want to hear both sides. Of course he did. Of course he'd fight. I typed back. I'll be there. Then I went upstairs, took off my suit, and lay down on my bed fully clothed. I didn't cry. I was too numb for tears. But I felt something else. Something unexpected. Relief. For years, I'd been trying to mold David into a leader, a successor, an heir. I'd been patient with his dismissiveness, tolerant of his arrogance, forgiving of his disrespect, because he was my son, because I loved him, because I'd wanted so desperately for the story to end with us running the company together, with him taking over gracefully, with our family legacy continuing. But that story was never going to happen. Not with this version of David. Not with a man who saw my experience as obsolescence, my guidance as interference, my presence as an obstacle. Firing him wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of freedom. The board meeting was brutal. David came with a lawyer. He presented his case, that I'd fired him in a moment of emotional instability, that his toast had been misinterpreted, that I was too attached to outdated methods and was using my personal relationship with him as an excuse to resist necessary change. My mother is brilliant, he said, and his voice was so earnest, so concerned. But she's 60 years old. She's been running this company since before the internet existed. The world has changed. She hasn't. And rather than admit that, she's lashing out at me for trying to modernize. 2 of the 5 board members were nodding. My heart sank. Then it was my turn. I didn't get emotional. I didn't appeal to sympathy or play the victim. I did what I'd done for 27 years. I presented facts. I showed them the emails where David had excluded me from client meetings, the reports where he'd taken credit for strategies I'd developed, the internal communications where he'd encouraged staff to bypass my authority. I showed them the org chart he'd drawn up found in his office files, where my position didn't exist. I showed them the proposal he'd drafted, never submitted, but saved on the shared drive, suggesting the board force my retirement. By the time I finished, the room was silent. David's face was white. "He didn't just disrespect me at that dinner," I said quietly. "He's been systematically undermining me for years. This isn't about hurt feelings or family drama. This is about an employee who betrayed his CEO and attempted a quiet coup." The board chair, Harold, cleared his throat. "David, do you have a response?" "Those documents are out of context." "Which ones?" I asked. "The emails, the org chart, the retirement proposal you titled Succession Planning for a New Era?" I was just brainstorming. "For a year? You were brainstorming my removal for a full year?" He had no answer. The vote was 4-1 in my favor. The dissenting vote was from Marcus, a board member David had been cultivating. No surprise there. After the meeting, Harold pulled me aside. "I'm sorry, Margaret. We should have seen this sooner. It's not your job to monitor my son's betrayal. That was mine." "What will you do now?" "Keep building my company, without him." "And personally, as his mother?" I thought about that. "I don't know yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe forgiveness someday. But right now, I need distance. I need to remember who I am without trying to shape him into something he's not." David left the building without looking at me. I watched him go from my office window, the office with the view, the office I'd dreamed of in that basement, the office I'd earned. He got into his expensive car and drove away, and I turned back to my desk and got to work. That evening, alone in my office after everyone else had left, I pulled out a leather journal I kept for thoughts too personal for anyone else to see. I opened to a fresh page and began to write. He wanted me to surrender, to step aside, to fade into irrelevance so he could claim what he thought was his. Instead, I freed myself. For years, I'd been caught between two identities: Margaret Morrison, CEO, and David's mother. Every decision filtered through that dual lens. Every choice weighed against how it would affect him. When I fired him, when I chose the company over the relationship, I finally chose myself. That doesn't make it hurt less. He's still my son. I still remember teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with homework, holding him when he cried over his first breakup. Those memories don't disappear because he betrayed me, but they also don't obligate me to accept his betrayal. I built this company with nothing. No capital, no connections, no safety net, just will and skill and relentless determination. David thought he could take it because he was my son, because family entitlement outweighed earned authority. He was wrong. The irony is that I would have given it to him. Eventually, if he'd been patient, if he'd been respectful, if he'd proven himself worthy not just as an employee, but as a leader. But he wasn't patient. He was greedy. And greed makes people reckless. At that dinner, in front of everyone who mattered, he showed his true self. Not the charming son I'd raised, but the ambitious, ruthless man he'd become. And in showing me that, he freed me. I don't have to wonder anymore if I'm being too hard on him, if I'm too controlling, too reluctant to let go, if my presence is really holding back the company. I know now that I'm not the problem. He was. Tomorrow, I'll announce Patricia's promotion. Next week, I'll be interviewing candidates for her old position. Next month, I'll be presenting our new strategic plan 1 that incorporates AI and blockchain and all those technologies David claimed I didn't understand. Because I do understand them. I've been learning, adapting, growing, the same way I've done for 27 years. The difference is, I don't announce every new skill loudly. I don't need to prove I'm relevant. I simply am. David will land on his feet. He's talented, connected, and has a good resume. Some other company will hire him. Maybe he'll learn from this. Maybe he won't. Either way, it's no longer my responsibility to teach him. My responsibility now is to Meridian, to the 57 people who depend on it for their livelihoods, to the clients who trust us, to the legacy I've built, and to myself. For the first time in 30 years, I'm choosing myself without guilt. He wanted me to surrender. Instead, I liberated myself from the burden of his expectations, and that, strangely, feels like victory. I closed the journal and looked around my office. The window showed the city lights spreading out below. Somewhere out there, my son was angry, hurt, probably planning his next move. But here, in the company I'd built from nothing, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, that would take time. Not closure. Some wounds don't close cleanly. But peace. The peace that comes from finally choosing your own worth over someone else's entitlement. I picked up my phone and sent Patricia a text. Thank you for having my back, for seeing what I couldn't see. Her response came immediately. Always. That's what family does. Real family, she meant. The kind you choose. The kind that earns trust instead of demanding it. I gathered my things and prepared to go home. As I walked through the dark office, I ran my hand along the wall I'd built, in the company I'd created, in the life I'd fought for. David thought he deserved this because I was his mother. But he'd forgotten the most important lesson. Nothing is given. Everything is earned. And I'd earned every inch of this. Tomorrow, I would keep building. Without him. Without guilt. Without looking back. Tonight, I would go home and sleep peacefully for the first time in years. Because the woman who couldn't fire her son was gone. And in her place was someone stronger. The woman who could.